Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. It is that time again. Don't know if it's as exciting as Mission Impossible. Oh, it's exciting as Mission Impossible. More exciting, I would say. Our friend in the United States, Richard Kazimer, joins us this morning. G'day, Richard.
Good day, sir. Do you remember the original Mission Impossible? I had this thing for Barbara Bain, who was married to Martin Landau at the time. Man, I tell you, and I was just a kid, and I think that's my first adult woman crush. Thank you for bringing that up.
Actually, I've got to tell you that my first adult woman crush was on Katie Manning when she was on Doctor Who. I thought she was all right. The thing I remember most about Mission Impossible is that this message will self-destruct. I always thought that was just so cool. The concept of this message will self-destruct is just beautiful. You don't actually have to worry about paper shredders or burning anything. It will do it all by itself. And we still haven't invented that.
I could have used those in some of my marriage licenses. Wait a minute. As a matter of fact, they did self-destruct.
Yes.
Good thing this isn't going over the air.
Oh, that's right, yes. Mate, in my next life, I've decided I'm going to be a divorce lawyer.
There's big money in that.
Yeah, and I've decided that to ensure that one is going to get some really big money, divorce lawyer to the stars. Because you know that when they get married, you only have to wait a couple of weeks before you're going to get the divorce anyway. Isn't that so cool?
Thankfully, you and I have finally found the right ones.
Yes, I know. The thing that annoys me, though, is sometimes you take a long time to do it. You think to yourself, now, why couldn't you have just made it simple?
It's well worth the wait. Now that we've both covered our behinds, let's move on.
That's it. Now, listen, my friend. Something that pops up here from time to time that's always interesting is the issue of contracting, or as we call it sometimes, subcontracting. Of course, we're talking about work contracting and subcontracting within a work situation. I understand how it works here, but from what I can understand in the United States, it can almost be just about described as the worst of both worlds.
It's a growing trend over here to have contract workers or freelance workers. Now, let's define exactly what a contract worker is. It is, by its own definition, a worker who comes in to do a specific job during a specific period of time. Now, the contract doesn't necessarily have to be a written contract. It could be a verbal contract. But you start at a certain date, you have a certain job to do, and you're paid a certain amount of money, and then there's a concrete end date. Now, there's a difference between a contract worker and someone who is a part-time worker or a temporary worker, because a contract worker is not part of the company's employees. They are someone who comes in, as I said, a freelance person who comes in to do a specific job. Part-time people work for the company, only they work for less than 40 hours and are not eligible for health benefits.
Just so we can get the separation here, we'll have a look at some of the other issues that surround this in a moment. A contract worker here would be somebody who has a contract with a company. You're saying that that's the case there, but it's for a specific period of time?
Yes.
Or is it for a specific task?
Both. It's to perform a specific task for a certain period of time. Some jobs would be like IT, or doing a marketing campaign, or doing a computer programming, design, setting up a website, things like that. Even dental hygienists, medical assistants can be contract workers to get a company or service up and running, and then they leave after that job is done. They could eventually be hired as part of that company, but what the employer is looking for is someone that they don't want to take on as a full-time employee, because it saves them money. They don't have to pay the person health insurance.
Before we go any further, it's something that people don't sort of get here because it's not something that's an issue. The whole thing about not paying health insurance, explain that in a way that we can understand, because clearly it's a significant issue in the United States, and it might seem crazy to say that it's a non-issue here. Nobody would think about asking for health insurance benefits if they were going for a job here, yet I do understand, even from friends of mine who've gone to the United States, that health insurance is one of the major components that you're looking for when it comes to finding a job. So explain why that is so, and also why employers like employees where they don't have to provide the health insurance.
Well, in lieu of giving an employee more money, the employer can get a discount. The more employees you have, you can buy a health care package. Healthcare companies go out to employers and say, depending on the size of your company, we can offer you this health care package at a discounted rate. So what the employer can do is can offer a health care policy to their employees, and it's an incentive to work there. It's a perk in lieu of giving them more wages. Now, sometimes an employer will give an employee the full coverage. They'll pay for the entire health care outright, or they will deduct it. They will give it to them at a discount and then match it. But what it is it's a perk and it's incentive to work for that company. To show you the difference in why employers are now looking at contract workers that they don't have to pay other than a flat check is that there is a cost in addition to your salary for hiring somebody. Let's say, for example, someone gets a gross salary of $40,000 per year here as a full-time employee. The Human Resources Department looks at that as not just $40,000 and done. They look at it as, well, there's 52 weeks in a year, so that's about $770 a week minus the Social Security, state and federal income taxes taken out. Now, if you add on the payroll taxes, unemployment taxes, health insurance, matching 401k, all the paid holidays, 2 weeks paid vacation.
401k, what's that?
401k is a retirement.
Right, superannuation. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Then you look at the average yearly sick days a person takes off, bereavement, any possible maternity leave.
You're talking about the on-cost of employment.
Late, how many times they may be late, any sort of training involved, the usual time people are doing personal business at their desk. Now, all that is when HR looks at that, they look at, well, there's the $40,000, and then there's all that time and all that non-productivity that actually has a dollar value. So you may be looking at maybe double the cost to hire somebody as opposed to just giving somebody a flat amount of money and you're off to the races.
We mentioned something about the health insurance. Just how much is a health insurance worth to an employee? I know in the United States it's something that people want. Just so we can understand, how much is that actually worth? Like, for example, the average health insurance premium to provide you with adequate cover, how much would that cost?
The good HMOs, the good coverage, they may take a couple of $100 out of your check every month, and then the employer would match that. You know, it's a substantial amount, but again, in the long run, it's good for the employer because the better the coverage that the employee has, potentially the less sick days that person is going to take off. So it's like a preventative cost.
The one reason why I was asking that is because it's not something that's significant here. I mean, if you want private cover, obviously you go out and provide it here. The incentive is that you actually get a 30% discount, which is a rebate through the tax system. But even if you don't have private cover, you're not left behind the eight ball because our universal healthcare system here covers everybody. So what I was trying to get across is how significant and how necessary it is for people to have that coverage in the US, because if you don't have it, you're not covered. That's the point, isn't it?
It is. So much so that if you're not covered by your employer's health insurance or your spouse's employer's health insurance, like I'm under my wife's policy, you really can't afford it outside on your own. It's a substantial amount to pay for it. By getting it through your employer at a discount, even if it's matched, even if you have to pay in a certain amount, it is a substantial amount. And what's happening now, because of the rise in healthcare costs, there are some employers, particularly big institutions, can no longer provide it, where they can no longer match it. It's an ongoing issue here, and that's all part of Obama's healthcare plan.
See, it's also interesting that you talk about the fact that you were suggesting that somebody who was on $40,000 a year is probably in reality costing their employer somewhere around about $80,000 a year, which means that every person who's employed is effectively costing their employer twice as much. That probably goes some way to suggesting why contract employment would be more than popular, but it perhaps also goes to suggest that one of the other issues I suspect that could be a problem with, when you're talking about somebody who's employed on a contract, you would be in the situation, wouldn't you, where people are effectively bartering their services? So therefore, if you're looking for somebody to employ, you're looking for the person who's going to be the lowest bidder, aren't you?
Yes, you are. And the onus of connecting between yourself as an independent contractor and a potential employer, you're out there marketing yourself. Craigslist is a great place to look for contract employment. And an employer will say, I'm looking for person XYZ to do XYZ job, start date, end date, and usually there's a price there of how much they're willing to pay, as opposed to somebody like a temporary worker or a headhunter placing you into that situation. What I've found is how fast it's growing here. There's an organization called the Human Capital Institute that did a study last year that's showing that 1/3 of the U.S. workforce is now non-traditional or contract workers, and it's growing at twice the rate of regular workforce, and just in the past couple of years or so. So it is a growing trend. It seems to work on both ends because the contract worker likes it. They don't have to get involved in any sort of office politics. They know what they're doing. They can go in and really market themselves, build a nice portfolio, and it keeps them fresh because they can go from one job to another and not get mired into what's going on in any business, particularly if it's a startup too, because a lot of times startups don't last more than a couple couple of years. But they go in and they do the job.
In the overall wash-up, do you think that contract working works better for the person who's doing the job, or do you think it works better for the employer?
It's probably a good 50-50. It works for everyone. The only drawback is, as I say, the contract worker is always looking for the next gig, and they don't have any health insurance, no pension plan, and they are solely responsible for the taxes. When you're a full-time or a part-time employee with an employer, that office, the payroll, the HR department, will deduct your Social Security taxes, deduct your income tax for state and federal. So you don't have to think about that.
Just listening to the way you're talking, one of the things that seems to be coming through to me anyway, loud and clear, is that the person who's a contractor would run into a lot of issues. I mean, you talk about being responsible for your own taxes and what have you. Well, then, okay, obviously you probably have to employ people like accountants to help you in that regard because they know the tax laws that you don't. You've also mentioned that some of the other issues like your health insurance and what have you, well, obviously you have to pay those. At the same time, if, for example, you wanted to raise a mortgage, you run into the problem that you're not able to provide a proof to the bank of a consistent level of income. So you're then forced into things, I suppose, and I don't even know if they're in vogue so much in the United States anymore, things like low documentation loans, which tend to carry higher interest rates anyway, because they tend to be by nature higher risk. All of these sort of things you'd have to argue are working against the contract worker, and at the same time, you don't necessarily know where the next meal ticket is coming from.
You're exactly right, and that's a great point, but it is a sign of the times. Whether or not banks are going to look at the other way, if you have a consistent record of being a successful independent contractor, a freelancer, that's one thing, because you can show that you have, particularly with your bank accounts, and you can show the bank or your lender that you do have a consistent employment record. However, you're right that you're always looking over your shoulder. It's really not that difficult to take care of your own taxes because the IRS is certainly there to help you out. And there's some basic forms. As long as you're reporting your income, that's fine. But people have a tendency, because of the economy the way it is, to say, well, you know what, I'll take out my payroll taxes or my Social Security taxes at the end of the year. I won't bother with it now because I need every cent that I have.
I can see that straight away. That's the sort of thing that becomes rather dangerous. Now, you can't help but think that if somebody was under the guidance of a professional, the professional would say, don't ever do that, because I can see straight away that could be a huge trap.
You're right. There's a criteria that the employer must meet to determine what constitutes an independent contractor and somebody that they just feel like not paying or not contributing to unemployment tax. So the IRS and the state labor boards have a specific criteria whether or not the worker provides his or her own tools to do the job. Is the worker eligible to receive compensation or health benefits? Can the worker work from home, or do they need to go to the job site specifically and use that employer's equipment? So you can't just arbitrarily say, I'm going to hire a bunch of people and I'm going to call them independent contractors and call it good. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it just strikes me that there are a lot of issues that perhaps people don't think. I mean, in many respects, you can sort of say, well, hey, it looks appealing, but I guess there are a whole lot of hidden costs that people like you talk about, and contributions. What was it, your 401ks, which I guess is what we would call your superannuation contributions? Obviously, health insurance benefits, which I can see are a really big thing in the US. All of these sort of things you have to provide yourself, which suggests to me that at a time when you're probably being employed because you're the person who's prepared to do so at the lowest rate, it's at the time when you have to bear expenses, which for many other people in employee situations, those expenses are borne or at least contributed to by the employer. So one can imagine that being a contractor isn't necessarily a picnic.
No, it's not, but with national unemployment rates at about almost 10%, and in some of the major cities and states are even higher than that, you're living hand to mouth. And if these are the only jobs that are available, as I say, that if 1/3 of the workforce in the United States is an independent contractor, these are the jobs that you need to take. The upside is that they're paid at somewhat of a higher wage. Now, granted, you do go in and negotiate unless an employer has a flat rate that they have already put on the table. And a lot of times these jobs, let's say, for example, if a full-time employee was doing this job and they were getting $40,000 a year for 52 weeks, the employer may hire somebody and pay them the equivalent of $50,000 a year salary, but only have that person do it for 3 to 6 months. So there's the attraction, is that you're getting a little more money up front, but for a less period of time.
Overall, in the overall assessment, I mean, I can clearly see that contractors are common and becoming more common. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, and the other question is, bearing that in mind, do you think for people who are becoming contractors and people who already are contractors, they actually, in the overall scheme of things, do you believe that they fare better as a contractor or that they would be better as a paid full-time employee?
I think you have a certain segment of the workforce that want to do this, that this is their lifestyle. But in all honesty, everybody wants a secure job with health benefits, retirement, pension, a place that they can call home. I think that people want a traditional 9-to-5, 5-day-a-week job. Hopefully we'll see the economy turn around and provide that at some point.
So the bottom line is that in an ideal world, people wouldn't be contractors. They would have that job with that regular salary coming in weekly, fortnightly or monthly.
They're looking for job security. You're absolutely right.
All right, my friend, as always, thank you very much for your time. Now, if you'd like to be Richard's friend on Facebook, Richard S. Kazimer is where you'll find him. And Kazimer is spelt Kazimer, Richard S. Kazimer. And if you'd like to be his friend, he's always happy to be your friend. And my friend, thank you very much for your time. We'll have a chat again next week.
All right, brother.